We've had the missions, February 2023, the foundations, the first steps made before the election. Now we've got the milestones. This is just basically rebranding. Where was the honeymoon period? What's going on?
Well, I think you're right. I'm sort of focusing, I think, on 3 foundations, 5 missions, as Louisa said, now 6 milestones. I think part of it is trying to find a better way, Rob, to connect with the public about how they might feel. And I think on the back of the American elections, one thing really stood out was that no matter what the Democrats and Biden said, at the end of the day, people said, do I feel better off? Yeah. And I think this is part of what Keir Starmer is trying to do, is say we do bear that in mind and judge us on that in 2029.
Well, let's see how he connected with Louisa, because you were the one that was doing the collecting, weren't you? I mean, it's not been an easy week. It's not been an easy month. You could argue it's not been easy, really, since the election, has it?
No. And I tried to kind of engage him on that.
Yeah.
On those opinion polls showing that people aren't that keen on what he's up to.
No.
He talked about turning around the country was a bit like turning around a business, which I'm not sure that many people can relate to, if I'm honest. Right. And so I put it to him that, you know, if it was a business, then he's the CEO and ultimately, you know, he has to be responsible. Would he resign if he didn't meet these targets? He didn't really answer that. I said to him, these polls showing his approval ratings plummeting are a bit like a performance review at work, and if I had that kind of review, I probably wouldn't be in a job anymore. He didn't really engage with that. I think he's very sure that he is doing the right thing. You know, you believe him when he says that he's sure he's doing the right thing. The question is whether other people believe it, and I think that is what this was about. Right. Like Caroline said, making some of these missions a bit more accessible and a bit more targeted. But have a listen to what he said, because he talked about his 6 milestones, and they are on... I'm going to have to read this out because I'm afraid I haven't committed them to memory yet. Living standards, house building, waiting lists, police, children being ready for school, and clean power. And he said to me that he is sure that those priorities are the same as all of our priorities, your priorities. So let's see what he said.
If you did a sort of poll or went out and asked people what are the things that matter most, I think they would do a list pretty similar to this. And I am saying openly, and I know it's risky in a way, that's what we're going to do. And when we get to the election, you'll be able to judge me by whether I've delivered on that. And that election will then give a verdict.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all probably watched that and thought what I thought at the time and what I put to him, which was actually we did go out and ask people, and there was a big thing that was missing off that list, and it was winter fuel payments. Right. And that's what, you know, when we spoke to people in Altrincham, which used to be a safe Conservative seat, especially older people, all brought that up. And that is the thing, that it isn't just winter fuel payments, is that there are farmers who are unhappy about inheritance tax. There are businesses who are unhappy about national insurance. Those things aren't on the list. So I think, you know, there's a danger in saying that he is in touch with what everybody's priorities are. If people are sitting at home and looking at those and saying, yes, absolutely, we're worried about things like waiting lists, but there are other things that you've done.
Pain of the other thing.
You asked whether he was remorseful about any of this, didn't you?
I asked whether he had regrets about the winter fuel payment, given the reaction to it. He didn't answer that. I suspect in the long term, he might decide, you know, in years to come when he writes his memoirs, that might be the thing that he talks about perhaps regretting, because he did acknowledge that there are going to be people, as he put it, on the edges. So there are people who are entitled to pension credit who are being helped, and there are people who perhaps don't need the winter fuel payment and would admit as such. But there are people in between that who are perhaps only £5, £10 over that threshold. And he did admit several times that those people are going to find it tough. And I wondered whether that was a hint that there was going to be help for those people. And I put that to Number 10 afterwards and was very much steered away from that. But I thought it was interesting that he was willing to talk and to emphasise that there were going to be people on the edges, as he put it, who are going to find that difficult.
Should we have a quick listen to it?
Yes, Flint.
These are difficult decisions, and I know there are individuals and families very concerned because, as I say, there is a group of those most exposed, if you like, who are protected, and that is good. There are people who didn't need it and have been pretty open about that. As to those that are on the edges, yes, I've got to acknowledge it's difficult, it's tough, but we had to take difficult decisions because we inherited a mess.
Yeah, why won't he? You're going to think this is obvious, but why won't he say he regrets it? Because he must do. He must, at the very least, regret the reaction to it.
Because I suppose it opens up, well, why haven't you changed your mind once you go down that road? And I think they, you know, in making this decision, I think, like governments before, they underestimated. It's not, as Louisa said, I don't believe every pensioner needs that. But they could have looked at other options. They could have taxed it, for example, or they could have thought about it for next year and had it more targeted, and there's a rationale for that. They could have taken into account that it's been a perennial problem that there are pensioners out there who should be getting pension credit. For whatever reason, they're not signing up for it. But it was a way to get some quick money in terms of in-year spending, and there's been a massive fallout to it. I thought, perhaps, that at the budget there might be some mitigation in terms of something for this winter, not just for older people, but maybe people with kids who are in fuel poverty. Let's see if next year something happens. But I think now they are powering through and thinking, right, we've got, you know, up until 2029, we've got time to maybe set this right and reset in a way, or reboot, as you said, Louisa, what our offer is and how people perceive us. Because it is about feelings, about how people feel about the government and how they're affecting their lives, which will count at the ballot box.
Over 2 million people signed resign now. I mean, in really moments after they were elected. You know, you were in the Tony Blair government. You've got a rather long time to do things professionally. I
suppose we didn't have social media petitions at that time.
Well,
as
maybe
well.
so.
You know, it's a different world we live in.
Maybe so, but you had
that.
goodwill. Salma, help us understand why all of this goodwill has disappeared, and also certain things that are missing from these pledges, are they called now? I mean, immigration, for one.
So, if we're being completely fair to Keir Starmer, I don't think it is necessarily a rebrand. He's trying to sort of build this stuff back up on the policies that he'd already announced. But I do think that this need to kind of, like, list everything and sort of try and engage with the public means that he has pretty much failed at that, and that there wasn't really a plan in place when he came into government. So there's a structural problem there. I think the issue around not putting immigration in, I think it's testament to the fact that there's not a lot that is going to be different than what's been done previously, and being able to get down illegal immigrations on small boats, being able to reduce legal immigration, it's not going to be that easy a task.
But that's not in the milestones.
No, exactly. But I think that's because he doesn't want to be judged on that, because he knows that that is not going to be something that he can.
The problem is, though, just to come back to Louisa for the interview, but the problem is, though, is that immediately, because that's not there.
Although he says it's there as a foundation.
Right, but then we've had foundations and milestones and
and pillars.
So then it looks like, you know, because immediately the quotes are there of how he was going to tackle the problems, smash the boats, smash the illegal gangs, and it's not addressed. And they're also, the papers are saying there's a watering down of some of the other things. So, for instance, in terms of climate change, not 100% by 2030,
95%.
but 95%. Now, I know that you interviewed him a month ago. Where do you seem more buoyant about that?
Yeah, I think let's have a look at what he said in Brazil, which was a couple of weeks ago, compared to yesterday. And you say things are going to get better, but when? Can you just tell us, is it a year? Will people feel better this time next year? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years?
Well, some of that investment is already coming in. We had an investment summit just a few weeks ago, £63 billion came in. So we're beginning to see the benefit of our approach. People don't like necessarily what you're doing to start with, because the benefits come further down the line. I get that. But in the end, we have to be judged at the next election on whether we've delivered the change that people voted for.
I think there is a bit of a shift there. I don't know what you thought. I think in that first answer, he was talking about things like investment and saying people are starting to feel better off. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm not sure how this idea of investment necessarily helps people now who can't pay their fuel bills. And so, you know, when I spoke to him this time, there was much more of an acknowledgement about how tough things are. He said that many, many times. People are not going to find it easy. People are not going to enjoy it. And I think the milestones are kind of an acknowledgement of the fact that they need to be a bit more specific about how people are going to feel it. But let's not forget that these milestones have got a 5-year timeline on them. And so I think, you know, people might be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because he has inherited a difficult situation, and maybe they think, yes, you know, he's got the right idea. But it still doesn't help you now, does it, if someone says things are going to be better, but, you know, you have to wait 5 years?
Of course it doesn't.
And it's also, you know, how do people judge? How does government understand how people judge how they feel? So I think, you know, people want to have energy security. I don't think people are against clean power, low-carbon energy. But at the end of the day, come 2029, they're going to say, what are our fuel bills like? What are we paying? How's that going, you know?
Look, I think the fundamental problem that the Prime Minister is facing is that he came with this mandate that said change. I mean, it was literally a one-word title of the manifesto. And the problem is, not only does it not feel like anything has changed particularly, there's like a repetition of a lot of stuff that happened in the previous administration. So I think there is an issue in the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of new ideas. They don't seem to have a grip on the machinery of government, and they don't really, they don't appear to know how they're going to get to a certain destination.
Well, they inherited a chaotic situation. So, I mean, I don't want to forget the pity part, but they've had 5 months in. They've got 4.5 years to get this going.
If they inherited a chaotic situation, he was an opposition leader for a long time. You'd think that he would have had a better plan coming in. It's not like he was on planet Mars. He's been here, he's seen it. It's just the thing that I worry about is that they have been in for 5 months. He's been opposition leader for a long time. He doesn't seem to have a plan for change, and nothing feels like it's going to change.
Yeah, but we had 14 years of continuous Conservative governments, and we know a lot of our public services were ravaged during that time. And I think honesty about building back is really important on this. I mean, the fact that he said 95% of clean power, I'm sort of glad he said that, because there's acknowledgement that we need a bit of gas in the system for security, and all the experts are saying that. So, you know, you're right. It hasn't necessarily been the best plan. I'm sure he didn't want necessarily Sue Gray going, all these other things happening. But he is now realising that he has to talk in better language that the public understand. Let's see what happens next year with the budget next year. But he set his own timetable now. He said, judge me by this in 2029, and they will.
Well, look, we've had 7 pillars of growth, 6 milestones, 5 missions, 3 foundations. I'm just going to be waiting for the partridge in the pear tree next week.
Oh!
But aren't promises an absolute graveyard for politicians? I remember Rachel Reeves here and Labour politician after Labour politician before the election saying, right, no tax rises, read my lips, etc. We've got tax rises, right? And what they were doing quite clearly was to say, right, what we're going to do is we're going to grow the economy. How are you going to do it? We're going to build and build and build. Well, we know that that's very, very difficult for legal reasons, to say the very least. But on top of that, next year, the CBI are predicting that growth is going to be down really quite significantly.
Well, actually, the CBI this time last year issued a press release saying growth would be going down. Actually, it didn't rise substantially, but it did go up, to be fair to the last government. So I think the CBI, let's see what happens.
They revised it down for this year.
Yeah, but they did that last year.
Revised it down for next year.
Yeah. They did it last year, and then growth slightly went up. So I think we've got to wait and see what happens on that front. But, you know, yes, I mean, growth is one of the hardest things to achieve, Rob.
Right.
And their house building, jobs, these are all the areas they have to show that some of their ideas are going to work,
so
and it won't
just
happen
level
overnight.
with the public. Say, right, thing is, difficult times, we're going to tax you. This is, you know, and I think if people have an authentic messaging from politicians, they're more likely to respond in a reasonable and fair way, and you don't get 3 million people calling for a new general election.
Well, they haven't raised income tax. There is a massive debate about, obviously, employment national insurance contributions, but they've said they've had to make some tough choices around this. We will see. But, you know, I think they have been open about what they inherited. There are some different views on that, but there's no doubt that there were areas of public finances that were not clear before this election, and they've discovered those holes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because at the same time, you know, one of the things he's always said is we're going to sort out public services, the NHS, waiting lists, all of that. We've now got warnings from doctors that we're entering a quademic. So the worst 2 months of the year for pressure on the NHS is December and January. We're now into December. And at the moment, there's 95% bed occupancy. It's usually about 90% at this point. Some people might think, why is it not 100%? But, of course, there's always got to be a bit of slack for emergencies. And we've got these 4 problems. So the norovirus, RSV, which is another virus, chest virus, can't think of the word. Respiratory.
For children.
That's the word I was looking for. COVID as well, and flu. So that's going to make people feel worse, isn't it? About politics, about literally their lives, and about the NHS struggling.
Yeah, I mean, the COVID rates, actually, you're right about COVID. I think the summer rates, they were up higher than they actually go into winter. Flu is up. The respiratory one, I think, actually is particularly an issue for young children.
Yeah, it is.
And so that's something for people. And the norovirus, I think my husband had a bout of that about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, this is the time of year where all these things can conflate. And you're right, the pressures on the NHS are there. What they have said, and they're right about this, they've put some more money in, but at the same time, they've got to, there's reform as well needed. And part of that is how do we get people to have the operations and planned procedures they want? They've said they've kept their sort of 92%. I think we're at 57% in terms of the 18-week waiting times. They want to get that up to 92% through 18 weeks. That's a big ask. I think they're going to have to add on about 2% in terms of appointments each year to reach some of those targets. So it's tough, but they can't do it by just throwing more money in or have more activity. They need to reform.
But, I mean, people will be looking for something like the health service as a way to feel good about the government, won't they?
Yeah, and here's the tricky part of it, is that there's very little that you can do from Whitehall with the health service. You've got GPs and practices that operate at a local level, you have trust level with hospitals, and then you have NHS England, certainly for England. So that's where, actually, this is where you have that separation between what a minister can do and what actually happens naturally. And I think what I would like to see is, in order to get those numbers down, what other sort of active engagement are they going to have? Are they pushing out the flu jab? You know, where's the material? Are we making sure that we have enough flu jab, for example, that's going to be able to go around in communities? I think there are those structural questions that are always asked a bit too late in this cycle that could prevent, you know, serious flu and people going into hospital for these kinds of things.
Flu jabs are available out there. The vaccine's out there. Please, if people want to, go and get it.
Go and take it up if it's available to you. Yes, they seem to be going around schools as well for the RSV, as well for youngsters to protect them. One of the things we're focusing on this morning is the extraordinary week-long crackdown on county lines drug scams. We've got two incredible people that we're talking to after 7 who were lured into these gangs as young as 9 and 11. So this is police forces across England and Wales taken part in a whole series of raids. £3 million worth of drugs, 557 weapons and 4 XL bully dogs seized. Great that that's taken place, but I think people will be terrified at the scale of it.
Yeah, and it's child exploitation. It's a form of child abuse, how these children are lured into this. And actually, I think that's some of the charges that should be laid against these people, because there's a huge safeguarding issue going on here. But also, it reflects something we were talking about a week or so ago around antisocial behaviour. You know, these people operate in some of our poorest communities where they're recruiting, and this is clearly significant crime, but it's the underlying intimidation and just awfulness that they create within communities in many forms, and parents and families seeing their children lured into this. Right. I mean, it's great that have this crackdown, but, I mean, goodness me, we need to do even more on this. And I think charges around safeguarding child exploitation, a form of child abuse, is really necessary for us to recognise how pernicious this is.
But I wonder why they don't stop the market. I was dealing with these cases, 20 years ago. I represented back-to-back gang cases where kids were inculcated into county lines based on their postcodes, right? It's absolute tragedy, especially for these young men, but girls too.
Yeah,
and what I don't understand is why they don't attack the demand. You know, one of the tragedies and the worst things about this is the hypocrisy of middle-class people, some of them, maybe, I don't know, but in Westminster and various other places, in high-vaunted parts of London and other parts of the country, who might be purchasing drugs, etc., and they don't give a fig about who's supplying it and the impact it has on young people. So it's all very well to arrest these people, but don't we want to get tougher on those people as well? Why isn't he doing that?
So I absolutely agree with you, and it's something that people have campaigned about. Lots of newspapers have raised this issue, exactly as you say, middle-class drug users who will have fair trade coffee and make sure that their milk is organically sourced, but they're quite happy to indulge in these practices. But what can you do beyond sort of calling people out and shaming them? What is the government legislation that changes that?
I think the other side of that, Rob, is, certain middle-class people feeling that, tackling antisocial behaviour and being tough on that is illiberal. They're not living in these communities where you have families and households, decent people, you know, doing their best with little means, who basically their communities are blighted by this. They're living in it every single day. So these sort of sometimes liberal dinner party conversations, maybe with some recreational drug use, when they're saying we shouldn't have antisocial behaviours, we shouldn't have this and this, they're not living it. And that's why you've got to be tough. That's why, actually, the neighbourhood policing is so important, because they do get relationships developed within community, do get that soft intelligence, if you like, about what's going on. Because if you don't have that there, these people are living in fear in their neighbourhoods, and they're not going to speak up if they don't think the police are on their side.
Fair trade and a bit of morality from people that...
Well, yeah, I mean, all the cocaine that's coming from Colombia, there's a consequence for the families and people living there as well.
Worst cases ever dealt with. No, they really
awful.
were. Absolutely.
Do you think, though, that there is a way that you can do early intervention that would break that cycle? Because the problem with this is that as amazing as this operation has been and the crackdown that's occurred, it stops county lines for a mere moment and then it comes straight back in. And my worry is that are we doing enough on the early prevention side?
Well, I mean, we're going to speak to two people who, you know, originally started out because they felt vulnerable. They didn't have anyone supporting them, and the gangs were offering them help, and they said, could you do us a favour and drop this package? No idea what it was. Before they knew it, they were very vulnerable, being threatened and physically hurt themselves.
One thing we could do, Salma, I tell you what, have some of our children who are at home and not in school, missing school in school. All the evidence shows if you're not in school for whatever amount of time, you are vulnerable. So more effort to get our kids back in school. There's too many kids not there.
And talking of, well, kids, you've got, of course, Billy and Darcy. And there's been a shift in boys' names. A bit of a pivot, but I was fascinated by this. Last year, apparently, the most popular boy's name was Noah. Got a few of them in our family.
Didn't know
it's been overtaken this year by Mohammed. Which they did. Mohammed was a top choice of parents naming their baby boys in England and Wales. More than 4,600 kids registered with the name. That's
interesting, isn't it?
So if we had another child, what do you think we'd call it?
What, another child?
Yeah.
Okay,
another
crikey. If we have another child. OK, what was the first one? That was Noah, was it?
Noah.
That was Noah. So now Mohammed.
Second one would be Mohammed. It's
amazing. I love it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.
It's nice to see you.
And thank you, Louisa.
A brilliant interview.
Thank you very much.